Hi everybody and welcome to the latest edition of The Extra Edge. As usual, we're discussing all things performance improvement, which to be frank in January is possibly something we all need a little of. And today we're welcoming our special guest Peter Wills, who is alongside regular contributor Tim Wiggum. So before we say hello to Tim and Peter, let me tell you a wee bit more about Peter, as he is the star of today's show. After bonding with Tim during a Springboks All Blacks match watched together offshore Angola several years ago, Peter has been a part of the Exceed Performance Improvement team since 2014. He focuses on performance improvement project management, as well as onshore and offshore coaching. He's also what we call the coach's coach, being involved in the training and the selection of new performance improvement coaches. It's an area that he's passionate about outside work too, having experience of coaching a rugby team to success. What I would say is possibly slightly less team orientated about Peter is his passion for cycling. Apparently he clocked up 6,700 kilometres during 2020. But I guess a bit of solitude is quite often what's required to refresh the batteries of a people person. Would you agree, Peter?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, cycling is classified as a team sport, especially at the professional level where it's actually mandatory. And there's a lot of sort of insights you can take from cycling and bring to a corporate environment. But I personally prefer it all on my own, and just time to process things and think through things. It's been really, really beneficial for me, especially during the lockdown when there was a lot of opportunity to do that.
Absolutely. If there was going to be a year to do it, 2020 was the year. Well, welcome to the podcast, Peter. And hello, Tim. How are you doing?
Hi, Rachel. Hey, Peter. Well, thank you. It's good to be here. And yeah, look forward to this episode.
You been cycling much recently?
Cycling tends to now be with the kids, so it can be a heart-stopping experience when you are kind of herding 3 children on their bikes across some busy roads. But because it's winter, it's been a while. So, and I have to say, the last cycle we did as a family was late summer. It was a gorgeous day in Aberdeen. We went up the Deeside line. I'll say de-cycled, de-bussed from our bikes, went down to the River Dee, had a bit of a picnic lunch, and it was absolutely stunning. So my last memory of cycling in Aberdeenshire, is a very positive one.
And it's got a picnic attached to it, which in my book makes everything significantly better.
Perfect.
Talking of which, and food and what have you, I think this time of year is a time where people do make an awful lot of resolutions about being better at things, better at not eating sweeties, for example, in my case, or being better at getting out and doing exercise. And talking about performance improvement as we are today, and I was getting my notes together for this podcast, and I was thinking that the resolutions that you set yourself are kind of similar to the resolutions that you would probably set yourself at work as well, but we don't ever really equate the two things as being similar. One is something that you're probably likely to give up after a hard week when you decide you do need a sweetie. But how about work resolutions? Do they work? Do you think they're worth considering?
Well, I think resolutions is probably the wrong way to look at it. I prefer looking at it as goals. So what am I trying to achieve this year? Similar to what we do when we, starting projects, what are we trying to achieve? We normally have very specific goals we set forward in terms of what we're telling our clients. But on a personal level, every time you go into a project, there's also personal goals. But so I think rather than saying, let's start the year out with a resolution, but let's say, okay, what do I want to achieve? What goals do I want to achieve? And it's something maybe a bit more tangible, something that is achievable. Set the bar a bit low if you're not that confident, because if you set it and you achieve it, there's that sense of achievement, rather than saying, well, I'm not going to quit smoking or something like that. Let's say health orientated, or not drinking. Like maybe, okay, smoking is probably not a great idea because everyone should really hopefully stop smoking. But drinking, maybe having a glass of wine every night, like trying to be reasonable, saying I'm not going to drink, but you know, let's say I'm going to have a glass every second night, or if you're going to do exercise, which is another big one, rather than say I'm going to lose 20 kg, say I'm going to endeavor to do 1 hour of exercise a week, and, you know, make it more manageable. So I think I prefer people using goals rather than resolutions. So that's my personal opinion.
That makes sense. I think it's, yeah, a lot of the time it's how it's portrayed, isn't it? Whether it's actually manageable or otherwise. So how would you, because I would say that I often have goals at work that don't get achieved because other things crop up. Day-to-day activity gets in the way. What would your sort of suggestion be, Tim, I guess, if you were to think about, right, this is a goal I want to achieve in 2021 at work? How do you stick to that? How do you not let everything else kind of push it to one side?
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that spring to mind. The first one is, if you aim at nothing, you're guaranteed to hit it. So goal setting, objective setting, prioritizing what you want to achieve is important, whether we like to admit that or not. It's a fact of life. You need to create a target in order to have something to aim for. The next thing that springs to mind is that we need to break big goals and big targets and significant objectives down into bite-sized chunks. One of the biggest paradigm shifts I had was over the last 10 years, really truly understanding what marginal gains means, and you know, step by step to complete the marathon. Insignificant seeming steps on a daily basis over time can add up to incredible achievements. A small reference point that I humbly refer to on my side, I mean humbly because I don't think that the books that I've done are bestsellers by any means, but many years ago when I thought of authoring a book, I thought, wow, that's just so much work. Is it, how can you achieve that? And then the stars seemed to align for me when I was doing my usual kind of reflection at the end of a year and kind of planning for the next year. And I thought, well, what if I could bundle together a number of goals, a number of aspirations to help me achieve a number of objectives for the year? And Peter will remember we were together in Saudi Arabia doing some climate assessment work for Aramco over there in 2016. And it was that year during the last downturn for oil and gas when I thought, well, if I'm going to work on thought leadership and put together a LinkedIn article every week, and then if I take those 52 articles at the end of the year and turn them into a book, hey, that might be my first book. And you know, at the end of the year, you have a book which is 100 to 200 pages, and if you look at that just in its singularity, you think, wow, that's a lot of work. But when you actually break it down to 365 days or your 52 weeks, and you think, you know what, a 2-page article every week is not impossible. And if you stick to that discipline, which is of course a key word when we consider goal setting and achieving goals, and break it down into those bite-sized chunks at work or at home, goals become much more achievable. So I think that mindset shift is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can appreciate that. Instead of looking at the ultimate objective, think about the breaking it down into steps, I guess. Is that something that you would employ, not just in a work basis, Peter, but in your 6,700 kilometers goal, for example? I don't know if that was your goal, if your goal was exceeded.
No, it wasn't at all. It was just to go out basically, and you know, I started cycling because I had a knee injury, and it was just about getting on the bike. And the more I went, you know, on the bike, the more I realized it was good for me in terms of my mental health as much as my physical. And so that became, you know, just something to do. As I've done it more this year, I have a number of cycling related goals, and some are definitely would be a huge achievement if I manage them. But like Tim said, you've just got to look at it every day, small steps. So I would aiming to try and cycle 10,000 kilometers this year, which would be a huge achievement for me. And if you think about that, that's a huge amount, but it's 30 kilometers a day, which, I mean, for someone who doesn't cycle, that still sounds like a lot, but I'm fortunate enough to have an indoor trainer, and that's just over an hour of work for me every day. And it takes, it's a discipline as Tim talks about, but I think there's also, and this more to the corporate side as well, is the amount of personal leadership, about what you want to achieve. Why are you setting this goal? What's your personal benefit from it? I mean, for me, I know it's going to be very good for me in terms of my health but also in terms of my cycling, which is something I love. And then tied into that goal is a number of other smaller goals, which that goal of trying to achieve 10,000 will tie into, and that's going to cycle when hopefully COVID disappears and we're allowed to travel again, to go to some of the most beautiful places in the world and cycle up some incredible mountain passes. And if I'm not doing my 30 kilometers a day, when COVID comes, I'm not going to be able to achieve those goals, which are sort of the best part of cycling.
Mm-hmm. Right, so it's almost like giving yourself a treat, something good to aim for. Is that something, I mean, discipline, some people are more disciplined than others, that's just a fact, and some people are more disciplined about some parts of their life. Maybe their work is hugely disciplined but their home life is less so, and vice versa. And you spoke about leadership there as being a really important part in that journey, but what do you do if you are, and especially, this is in a work sense, if you're tasked with helping the performance of somebody or a team who just are inherently fairly undisciplined? What are the methods, what are the tools to try and turn that around?
Well, for me, it's trying to understand why. There's always an underlying cause to why a team is not performing. Whether it be, interpersonal issues, whether it be a perceived issue with management or an actual issue with management. Sometimes it's, guys are dealing with a lot of personal issues, which, in our context where we're working, that's, when you have a personal issue at home and you're away from home, that becomes a major issue. And so when you approach a team for the first time, it's really important to, one, come across humbly, which I'd like to think we do, and secondly, take interest in who they are. When you understand who they are, you can start to understand where some of the problems are. Maybe there's 2 or 3 guys within a group of 10 that don't like each other at all, and so the team are constantly working around these maybe 2 or 3 guys who have an issue. And then, we're professionals at performance, we identify those, and it's about maybe taking that to a level where we can solve. Sometimes it's just a lack of motivation. If guys have been doing the same thing for the same time, butting their heads against the same problem and not being listened to, and we come on board and we're like, well, we're here to listen and we're here to deliver change, that opportunity for them to verbally say that to someone and get that off their chest and then see impact from what they're saying can quickly change the mindset of a group to where they're like, okay, well, one, here's a guy who said he's going to do something and he does it, but secondly, well, this is a better place to work, like we're doing better, and the teamwork and the motivation increases, and then you see things like discipline being sticking to the performance process, which we're there to implement, making sure we're doing the meetings that we say we do, being vocal about issues that you think are not going to affect, that are going to affect the team's performance, rather than just keeping them to yourselves. So it can be quite a slow process at times, but ultimately it's trying to understand the individual and what's holding them back. Because everyone's got the potential to do well, everyone's got the potential to perform, and I believe everyone wants to do well and everyone wants to do the job to the best of their abilities, but there's always external factors that are influencing their ability to do that.
Tim, that sounds like, that makes perfect sense. It sounds like quite an involved process though, and I guess that's why people like yourself and Peter exist, because a company is running itself on a day-to-day basis. It may not necessarily have the in-house skills or indeed the capacity to dig as deep as that. Is that something that you find quite frequently, and or is it a fact that because you are a slight, external to a company, albeit you're working in partnership with them, does that help instead? Is that one of the reasons that it is successful?
That's a fantastic point you just made there, Rachel, and I think that's one of the main reasons that consultancy emerged decades ago, is a realization that external expertise and external objectivity, unaffected by internal politics and internal performance creep, is a great way to re-energize and re-galvanize a work environment. And to be honest, I've laughed about this at home before. The amount of times that within your family you might be aware of something that needs doing, but just leave it. And then someone external, be it other family or friends, come in and say, hey, why don't you do this? And because it's not your partner or someone in your immediate family saying, why don't you do this? All of a sudden you change your approach to it and say, yeah, that's a great idea. And the next thing, it gets done. So
Yeah.
If we're all brutally honest, and anyone listening to this podcast, if you're truly honest with yourself, the reality is that external experts and expertise is important, and that's why we believe that due diligence in selecting a partner or an external consultancy or external coaches, it's very important, and we've worked hard on our own credibility and experience and expertise and due process and quality assurance. But provided you've done that, then completely agreed, external objective support comes in, and this is what we've specialized in. So performance improvement, we take feedback from every single project, and we've been on close to 40 now, where we've supported upstream oil and gas teams, typically offshore, but some also onshore. And we always do feedback throughout and at the end through retrospects and interviews one-on-one with key leadership to understand what worked and what could be done better. And so we keep applying that to our own intellectual property, our own approach, the way that we believe works best for the environment that we're supporting, which of course, let's be honest, is going through a rapid transition at the moment, the energy transition. So that's something that we're very aware of and wanting to be very, very involved in. So we're listening closely at the moment, and Peter touched on this. We listen to the teams that we support. We start off with a climate assessment where we interview a representative sample of the team to hear from them, the guys doing the work, about what problems they see, what the blind spots are, what the opportunities to improve are. We strongly believe that solutions reside within the teams that are having the challenges. We just come along and create the conditions within which they can express themselves, within which they can be heard, within which their lessons learned can be actually pursued through to closure and implementation. Because, as Peter said, we strongly believe that everyone has the potential to reach high performance, individually and as a team, collectively. We don't think that we know everything, but we do think that we know a fair amount about what works to help upstream teams realize their potential a lot faster than if they tried to do it themselves. Let's be honest, in many cases, teams have been trying for a while to get better, but have been in a holding pattern and struggling. And this comes back to my point about even in a domestic environment, you get someone from the outside who comes in and says something that you've said before, but there's something about someone from the outside identifying and focusing in on a challenge that's been expressed by, in some cases, many people that actually now needs to be dealt with. So it's a fantastic subject about which I know Peter and myself are very passionate. And, you know, the discipline is one thing. I love the point that Peter made about the indoor trainer, the indoor cycling trainer, because that was an excellent analogy or example of creating the conditions for success. You know, yes, it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere. You've got an aspiration of cycling 10,000 kilometers or 10,000 miles, which breaks down to a certain amount of kilometers or miles per day. Not necessarily easy if you've got heavy rain, slippery roads, challenging climate outside, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. And one of the key things that we try and help teams realize is that with some simple disciplines and by creating the conditions which an external extra resource can do for a team, it is possible to improve day by day, week by week, month by month, to achieve that potential that we talk about.
I like Tim's analogy also about when you have that external viewpoint. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about our process in particular, and similar to, and using Tim's analogy, is that instead of someone pointing out that you should do something at home, they're like, I see that you need to do this, maybe you and I can do it next weekend. And we come in and we pretty quickly, when we're doing those climate assessments, it becomes quite obvious what are some of the major underlying issues. And rather than pointing them out and saying, well, these are the issues, good luck, it's saying, well, these are the issues, this is how we're going to try and address them, this is how we're going to try and address them with the team, and we're going to grow together, and we're going to watch the change, and we're going to be there to support you through that change, because we know it's not easy. And it just makes the process for the clients a lot easier, I think, because you have that support. And also, when you are when you're bringing in an external contractor, consultant into your company, a lot of people are saying, well, why are we doing this? Do we really need it? And if someone just comes and says, well, this is the issue, a lot of people within the organization would say, yeah, we all know that. This is not anything new. And I just paid a fortune to these people to come and tell us something we know. The difference is that we tell them that, and then we're like, this is how we're going to change it, and we're going to be there to make sure that it gets done.
Right, okay, that's interesting, because I was going to ask, do you often find that you are brought in for a specific reason to sort a specific problem, and it turns out that it's actually a different problem altogether from what your client thought it was? But it sounds like from what you're saying there, it's more a case of people possibly realise what's not right, but it's the taking it to that next level of sorting it out, the resolution of it, that's the bit that they don't get. That be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think most of the projects I've been involved in, there's been a key member of senior leadership who's identified that there's opportunities to improve. And having worked probably with Ian or Tim, or myself in the past, have seen that this is a good way to do it. And so, they take the first step, and then we come in and we get involved. And yeah, as we call it, there are some low-hanging fruit which everyone's aware of, but it's beyond that. It's you take care of that low-hanging fruit. Of course you do. That's important, but it's also about leaving the team more coherent and focused on their performance and their personal performance to within the team and within the organization.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, moving on a little bit from that, but in a similar vein, and there's no way that we could have a podcast in January of 2021 without mentioning the wider context that we're all involved in at the moment, the ongoing pandemic. You're talking there about identifying issues and helping people solve them. Are those issues, have they changed in the past 10 months or so? Have operators, clients asked you to come in and solve different issues that have maybe accumulated in the first 6 months of the global pandemic?
Yes, I can answer that one with a lot of recent experience, Rachel. It's great to see that the leaders that we have the privilege to support tend to be really humble and open to external advice and input from what is working well elsewhere. I was on a Teams call this morning with a client that we're supporting in Mozambique on an onshore gas development campaign. And the big challenge that everyone's facing in our context, Rachel, is remote virtual collaboration. I know I've touched on this on previous podcasts, so I don't want to bang the drum for too long. However, it is a very clear and present challenge for team leaders who are trying to pull together subject matter experts who are often spread across the globe for a campaign on or offshore somewhere in the world. And they're facing the challenge that they've perhaps not faced before. Traditionally, they would identify somewhere geographically appropriate to fly in the project team, have a 1, 2, 3 day workshop where presenters go through information that needs to be understood, and then groups work through the program, the work instructions to challenge it and to come up with better ways and identify risks that need to be incorporated. Now, of course, with limited travel, with a global pandemic, which presents a very significant safety risk, and with other unknowns, uncertainties, and anxieties, we're having to do that remotely. And so one of the things that we have pivoted to help teams with, and we've now done a number of these workshops, is an agenda and a process using digital technology to help team leaders achieve that. So that's definitely one of the significant challenges and concerns that upstream drilling managers, production managers, abandonment superintendents, the kind of clients that we're supporting at the moment, that's the kind of challenge that they face, is to get information out to a team that's literally spread across 10 time zones. Then, of course, there's the challenge of actually mobilizing. And so another thing that we've been involved in, because we're providing coaches to 3 projects at the moment, 2 in the North Sea and then 1 down in Southern Africa, is the process of making sure that you've had your COVID test before travel, before then going to the work site, and complying with all the quarantine and safety gate requirements for each project. So that, and again, I've got a huge amount of admiration for health and safety leaders at different organizations who are literally drinking out of a fire hose at the moment, trying to come up with procedures, processes, protocols, which tick all the boxes, keep everyone safe, but allow a project to move forward and for work to be done. So those are some of the things that spring to mind based on the prevailing pandemic.
Yeah, massive, massive challenges, I guess, and because the goalposts differ quite a bit as well, I guess that doesn't make it any easier. So that's obviously had an impact then, and yeah, I suppose the focus of some of your activity. The other thing that I can imagine will be having a massive impact, if not straight away, but certainly in the very near future, is the thing that we all talk about in this industry. As much as we talk about COVID-19, we talk about the energy transition. I mean, those are 2 buzzwords that are just not going to go away very quickly, and neither should they. But I mean, they've really come to the fore, I would say, in the past sort of six months or so. It just seems to be more and more and more a topic that we discuss. And I was thinking about how would you think about transferring what you do just now from an upstream perspective to the energy transition, to the renewable sector. And it kind of made me think about a lot of the work that you've done, in particular with the decommissioning side of the industry, which, 10 years ago, decommissioning was quite a dirty word and nobody wanted to talk about it very much because there was too much good stuff going on from the upstream perspective. But decommissioning has become far more a norm in this industry, and that's something that I know, as you've done a lot of work with performance improvement work in the decom sector. Do you see that transition, the way you transitioned into decom, being the same sort of, not the same circumstances, but the same principles for energy transition? Are you going to be helping people shift from one mindset to another in a positive way with good outcomes, or do you think it's going to be a completely different setup?
Well, I mean, I personally, having worked in across the industry and worked in other sections of the oil and gas outside of drilling, definitely very strongly feel that what we do is beneficial to any heavy industry or any industry in general, actually, because we're very people focused, and our processes is not simple, but it's pretty straightforward, and it focuses a lot on the team. And there's teams working everywhere at the moment, and across multiple industries. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because this week, and I've been participating in, is the Davos Energy Week. It's all been online, which has been good, but I mean, it's all about energy transition. And there's been some fascinating people talking, but all of it's going to require a huge amount of work, whether it be building new hydrogen production plants, whether it be installing massive offshore wind farms, whether it be updating the grid to carry biogas. All of these things are industrial processes and require people to do. Nothing's fully automated yet, and so there's definitely room for us to move into that, and then you add mining along, heavy industries where people are involved is our strength. I will say one thing which sort of stood out to me was one of the presenters was talking about new projects and project size over the last 5 years and looking 5 years ahead. And 68% of the monetary value in the next 5 years is still going to be spent on oil and gas, because it's such a fundamental part of what we do as a society, and everyone in that space is very aware of the need to decarbonize their operations. So it's a mixture between the two. So we need to continue our oil, and we need to continue drilling. We need to continue supplying the world with energy, and so that that's going to take place. And once COVID disappears, which McKinsey and the likes are predicting that to be towards the end of this year, we're going to see a potential bow wave of projects that are needing to come online to make up for this lost supply and the massively increased demand.
And I guess that brings performance challenges as well then, yeah. Especially when people have maybe been not necessarily used to a hugely quieter setup for the past year or so, but it has been different. There's no doubt about it. The same kind of pace hasn't been there. So yeah, I guess that's the opposite end. The challenge is when it suddenly goes boom, and people are absolutely stretched, and thinking about your day-to-day performance is possibly something that slips down the agenda unless you're pretty careful about it.
And it's something we've been involved in both. When the 2016 and 2017 uptick came, we started to see a lot of operators were running quite thin and needed that support purely just to have additional people, because everyone within the team was so stretched. There was no focus on performance because they had so much to do. There was so much expectation placed on them. To have someone who can pick up the slack from a performance side and add to the team, because a lot of our coaches are very technically minded too, and to have someone to bounce ideas off provides a huge amount of value to them. And we focus a lot on bringing the right people in. So you have technically minded people, but also people who can understand the teams and understand the dynamics within teams. And so you're adding a huge amount of value to your organization when that's when we arrive.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, actually, and I've never really thought about the makeup of your group of coaches. I mean, you've got a big number of coaches, I would say, or more than I am ever aware of, put it that way, as a slight outsider. What is the makeup? You're saying that some are very technically orientated. Do you have people who are contributing to the coaching who are not really involved in the energy sector at all, other than that they are coaching on your behalf, that you ignore that side of things and completely focus on the sort of, I don't know, the human foibles aspect of it?
Yeah, maybe if I take that one. I mean, Ian and I have always talked about a blended approach to our continuous improvement coaching support. Over the last 5 years, we've tended to select more oil and gas background coaches because that's what our clients have been looking for. So I think the key point is we provide a service specializing in continuous improvement, performance improvement to upstream oil and gas clients predominantly at the moment. However, as Peter's already mentioned, we feel that our approach is very transferable to any project team, particularly in remote areas, in the heavy industries, because that's where we've really sharpened the saw over the last 10 years. we strongly believe that any competent team, so that the team needs to make sure that they've got competent individuals in each of the job roles within the project team. Our expertise comes in believing that that competent team can achieve high performance, provided the right conditions are created for that team to flourish, and provided the right approach is implemented in order to unlock their capability. And so Peter touched on the word simple. What we often say is that the performance improvement process that we implement is simple but not easy. The reason we say it's not easy is because the steps are definitely not rocket science. They're relatively simple steps. In fact, behind me, I've kind of got our 12-step performance wheel. We're talking about advanced planning. We're talking about after-action reviews. We're talking about lessons learned. But what I will say is all the books I've read, when we talk about the Navy SEALs, when we talk about Pixar or Apple, all the top companies, let's talk about sports, the All Blacks, they always say it's about getting the basics right. It's about the simple steps. The not easy part is that you need to get people engaged and enrolled and involved. And that takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a certain specific expertise, which technical leaders don't always have. They don't necessarily have the expertise, nor do they necessarily, nor potentially should they have the time, because they're focused on keeping operations moving forward on the critical path. If we're on non-productive time, your operational leader, like a drilling supervisor or a mining superintendent, he or she has got one mission, and that is to get back on productive time and moving forward. During that time, though, there's a huge amount of information that could be gathered and learnt and pursued to improvement for next time. And if you don't have a resource focused on that, a resource that understands how to get on with people, how to approach someone and ask them what went wrong without that person getting defensive and shutting down because they think that they're going to be exposed for having done something wrong. All of that requires an ability to get on with people, to understand how to approach people, to communicate with them, to listen to them in a way that makes them want to share. And we believe that this is what we bring, Rachel. So coming back to your original question, the coaches that we bring on board with Exceed, we select very carefully for mindset, for what we call servant leadership, people that want to support teams. They're happy enough to not take the glory. All they want is to help the team realize their potential. And that could be in any project environment. And in terms of the approach, so having identified the right people with that mindset and that heart set, if you like, to come and support teams, we then go through a fairly robust 1-week course to help those individuals understand how to implement our 12-step approach, which we're constantly evolving based on our clientele and what seems to have worked at the front line. We would take those individuals through the course to make sure that this is something that they want to do in a non-directive optional role to help teams unlock their capability. And at the end of that week, we have an exit interview, and it's quite interesting because not only are we having a look at the potential coach, but that potential coach is having a look at Exceed and saying, is this an organization that I want to work with? Do I genuinely believe that this challenging approach is something that I want to try and implement, often within high ego, high risk team environments, which is not for everyone. And those individuals could come from a variety of backgrounds, and we would be selecting people not only for their mindset and then their likely adoption of our approach, but also based on the client work scope and the client industry. And this is where this energy transition is very interesting because, as we look at other renewable industries, so Peter's right, I believe that more than 50% of energy will be coming from, oil and gas over the next 10 years. I've seen a number of reports saying that. The fastest growing energy sources are wind and solar, but of course we're aware of other forms of energy that are being considered. And so what kinds of people, what kinds of coaches would we be looking for to then come in and support project teams? We would be listening to the market, listening to clients. What are they looking for? And we would be trying to understand which would be the right people with the right technical background to identify that they have the right mindset and heart set to train them in our process to go and support project teams at the front line.
So
No, and I
100%
think,
transferable in terms of a process. It's
Totally.
the conduit, the vehicle for getting that process across. It might shift slightly.
Right.
Sorry.
well, I think it's important that there's some level, maybe they don't need to be perfectly technically minded on one specific thing, but if you have a technical background or an engineering background like myself, a lot of those things are not straightforward, but can be understood. And it's about then using that ability that we look for specifically, actually more importantly, I think, that Tim mentions, the personality traits of being that servant leader, being that person who can infiltrate or get themselves embedded in that team and become a valuable part or member of that team and identified as that. That's almost more critical than their technical ability, because I come from a very specific wireline background, and when I came offshore as a coach, my drilling knowledge was limited, but my fortunate ability to be able to embed myself with the team enabled me to learn a huge amount from people who were willing to share with me, because they know that I'm valuable, and if they help me, I'm going to help them. And so I'm sure there's a couple of coaches or we have definitely a couple of coaches that are working now, which would easily be able to go and put into a different industry, just purely based on their technical ability to understand technical concepts, but more importantly, the way that they fit very well within teams, very seamlessly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, guys, we're almost out of time. So before we go, I'm going to put you on the spot, which I like to do, because I know you've been busy. Tim, you mentioned there are 3 PI projects on the go at the moment. I know you've completed about 5 DWOPs, I think, in recent months. So from each of you, and I'm sorry for whoever I pick first, let's just have one particular gem, one particular bit of activity that's really struck you as being something that you think the guys listening to this would want to hear. So, Tim, what's your gem from the past 6 months?
My gem is that we had the good fortune of working with Gavin Hastings, who was a former Scotland and British and Irish Lions rugby captain, absolute legend in my book. When I was growing up playing rugby, he was one of the names of one of the potential world's best players who had hit the rugby stage in the mid-80s. So we were fortunate enough to integrate him into the agenda for 2 of the DWOPs that we ran in December, actually. And he had a number of gold nuggets, which he dropped into his 15-minute, 20-minute sort of motivator, energizer for the team. First, I would say that it's a really valuable thing to consider, which I haven't seen done at most workshops that I've been on in upstream oil and gas, and that is to get a celebrity or an inspiring leader from another industry altogether to speak and bring a different kind of energy and value to the session. So that's the first point I would make. But secondly, he had some great one-liners and catchphrases and insights based on his experience. And I can't go through them all now, but the one that sticks out is consistent excellence. And that consistency is something that we try and bring to support teams. Is even when you don't feel like going to the gym or going to have a planning meeting for the forthcoming operation, just go and do something, because something will always come from it. Even if you just go into the gym and do some stretching, or even if you just get around the table to go through the work instruction for the forthcoming phase for 5 minutes, you will achieve more than if you didn't do it at all. And so consistent excellence and consistency was something that Gavin Hastings talked about. If it was good enough for him, it's good enough for me.
Wise words. Peter.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be able to make it down to South Africa for the Christmas holidays, because when I left, everything was sort of okay. But as we all know now, that drastically turned around. Unfortunately, I was able to make it back. But my father, who passed away about 2 years ago, was heavily involved in organizational development and leadership for a number of years, starting back in apartheid South Africa, working with the labor unions, has been one of the few guys who was recognized by the black labor unions as a guy who would work for them. And my stepmom and I were talking about some of those sort of key things that Dad used to say, and the one that really stands out to me is be the change that you want to create. And so that's taking personal accountability. If you want to change something within the system, that you and be that change. So and that's always, it's always, whenever I'm just doubting something, like, is this creating the change that you want to see, or is it not? So,
Yeah, I like that. And you must be really proud of what your dad did, I would
yes,
imagine.
no, very proud, yeah.
That's quite an inspiration for you, I'm sure, personally.
Definitely, yeah. It was a great man.
Great. Well, listen, that's a lovely note to end on, I think, guys. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for listening and watching today. As ever, if anything has piqued your interest, and I can't imagine it wouldn't have, given some of the bits and pieces of information that have come out of this session, then please feel free to get in touch with either Tim or Peter or any of the Exceed team that you may know directly. Drop them a line, give them a call. Their details are available online, and we look forward to seeing you at the next edition. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.